One quick point. In discussing narrative research, it's important to understand that, and like I said, this is an introduction. I don't, in any sense, intend for this account to be holistic, right? These videos are supplements to text, to lectures, to whatever it is. And my role in this whole process of walking you through various forms of qualitative research is to give you an indication of how your interests, your particular interests, might fit one of these 6 models of research. So if what I'm saying sounds, if things are ringing in your ear and you think, oh, I really like that, I think that would be something that I would like to do, or that type of research would be something that I'd like to do, the narrative research model might be a type that you can implement. With that being said, there are various types of narrative research, and that's what I want to talk about now, right? So this would be types. Again, not exhaustive. The first is a biographical study. Biographical study. And a biographical study is an account of another person's life, right? If I'm doing a biographical study, I'm offering an account of another person's life. It's important to understand, if you select a biographical study, in accessing this information and asking the participant to disclose his or her life narrative, right? The participant is going to have to share life story or life history. And I think I talked about this. Yeah, I talked about this in a little bit. Right? Which is not to be confused with life history. We'll talk about life history in a second. So I'll list it and I'll go back and discuss it. The second is an autobiography. The second is an autobiography, and the autobiography is written by the subject of the study. So whoever is the subject of the study, the one disclosing the historical events in his or her life, is the individual who's writing the study. Right? So this is written by the subject of the. Okay. The third is a life history now, formally, and I'll talk about the difference. Life history, and a life history is an account of the subject's life, right? An account of subject's life. Number 4 is a personal experience story. Personal experience story. A personal experience story is an episodic account of experiences throughout the subject's life. An episodic account of the experiences of the subject throughout his or her life. So I'll just put episodic. E-P-I-S-O-D-I-C. And then 5, how many types are we talking about? 5. The last is an oral history. An oral history. I want to cite an oral history, and this is coming from Creswell. Quote, an oral history consists of gathering personal reflections of events and their causes and effects from one individual or several individuals. So it's a gathering of personal reflections of an event, right? So this is a collection personal history. I'll just put H-I-S-T-O. Collection of personal history. Alright, roughly. There's a few things that I want to say now that we have all of the various forms. Biographical study, an autobiography, a life history, a personal experience story, and an oral history. Alright, I'm not going to go, a lot of this is pretty self-explanatory. It doesn't require me to go and flesh it out with too much detail. in a biographical study, right, we know that when we're doing a biographical study, you're as a researcher chronicling the biography of an individual. You might do so, right, you might do so by actually talking with the individual. It's not mandatory that you interview the individual. I mean, it's required that you interview the individual, but you can also access a lot of this information through documents, through papers, through many other means of accessing and sharing the life history, the life story of the individual. This life history, right, is important to understand that in accessing this information, and this is just a research tip from me to you, is that there's going to be a huge amount of distance, typically, in your research between collecting the data and analyzing the data, right? So it doesn't matter which of the 5 that you're doing, right? It doesn't matter which of the 5 that you select as, and there are more, but it doesn't matter which of the 5 that you select as a form of narrative research that interests you most. What you have to recognize, right, with probably the exception of an autobiography, right, what you have to recognize is that there's going to be a disjunct between the data that you have, right, the data that you collect, and you might collect this data through audio, and I'll talk about this later. You might use video, you might journal, and so on and so on and so on, and then your data analysis. Right? There's going to be a huge amount of time that separates, right? There's going to be a huge amount of time typically that separates the data that you collect and your analysis of the data. So as a quick an example, I didn't use narrative, maybe parts of narrative research, maybe a few points of narrative research I used in my own dissertation. For my dissertation, what I did, it was more phenomenological, which I'll talk about in the next series. But in my dissertation, what I did was interview several Holocaust survivors, most of which were actually interned in concentration camps. I think 1 or 2 weren't. And I asked them about not only their experience, but what their interpretation of evil was with respect to having gone through what we as a society, as a global society, would consider, if not the greatest manifestation of evil, close to it. And I'll talk more about the ramifications of my study later, because it's not really about that. What I am disclosing with you is that I think I interviewed, I don't remember now, it was like 12 to 16, 17 Holocaust survivors. And, I started my research and I got all my paperwork done to start my research. Let's say, I don't remember, let's say it was probably like in June, maybe. I researched throughout most of the summer, because that was the time that would be best for me to access the participants. So I spent a lot of the summer researching, and I think I finished my last interview in probably January. So you got June, July, August, September, October, November, December, January. 8 months. 8 months of interviews, and 8 months of audio, and 8 months of transcriptions, and 8 months of a lot of data. As a matter of fact, I launched my YouTube page a year ago in January of 2010. I created the account earlier, but I launched the YouTube page in January of this year with one of those interviews, right? In the interviews that I gathered from the Holocaust survivors, it was 8 months from the time that I interviewed the first person to the time that I interviewed the last person, and then I had to go back and transcribe everything, which took another maybe 3 or 4 months. So there could be as much as a year between the time you collect the data and the time you analyze the data, depending on how large your N is. The larger your N, the longer the time. And it was just me working by myself. It wasn't like now as a professor I have research and graduate assistants that can assist me. It was me by myself. There's a huge gulf of time between the time I collected the data and then the time I analyzed the data. So